Welcome to our 2017 Global Tax Market Assessment webinar. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Allie Johnson. I am the Content Marketing Coordinator for TaxTalent. This webinar features global tax staffing experts Tony Santiago and Will Sheppard. I will let them introduce themselves and give you a brief overview of their experiences and companies. Tony, would you mind starting us off?
It's my pleasure, Allie. We look forward to presenting this webinar to you. I am the president of Tax Search, as well as a number of other entities, TaxTalent, TaxBridge Staffing, TaxJobs. Our family of brands focuses exclusively on the recruitment, development, and retention and consultant utilization of our clients. Our clients tend to be large Fortune 500 companies, global companies with big presence, or middle market companies building their tax departments for the first time here in the U.S. Our emphasis is in the U.S., and we have aligned with BPA Search, Will and Barry and the team there for a number of years, and have an alliance on the international side where they cover the work there and we cover the work here in the U.S. Will, you want to give us a couple minutes of a description of your background?
Thanks, Tony. Yes, as Tony mentioned, I'm a director of BPA Search. We've been set up since 1993. We're based in London. And I've been recruiting in-house tax specialists all over the EMEA region for the last 11 years. Generally speaking, my focus is on Europe. We handle things, a range of people, sometimes locals into local positions from Panama to Japan. Sometimes it's people looking to relocate across borders. And, you know, as Tony said, we only recruit in-house. I think this gives us a bit of an in-depth understanding of what our multinational clients need. So, yeah, we hope that while we're talking about these trends that we're seeing, this might spark some questions in the minds of the audience. So I think Allie's now going to quickly explain how you guys can pose those questions to us, and we can then address them a bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Will. So it's a good point on bringing up the ability to chat in questions during the webinar. This chat feature gives you the opportunity to submit any questions you may have, and then once we have our Q&A session, we can then address those. And then also you have the ability to ask your own questions during our Q&A. So you will do so by clicking the Raise Your Hand tool on your webinar panel. So that's a really great ability for you guys to ask any questions that you think of during this webinar and really make sure that you feel comfortable for the upcoming year. We are now going to shift our focus to why this year is different. Tony, take it away.
One of the things that Will and I both agree in our firms that 2017 is going to be different than anything we've seen in the last 30 years. Potentially monumental, but at a minimum, it's going to be extremely disruptive to the tax profession, and particularly the corporate in-house clients we provide services to. There's three things that are occurring that make this unique. We call it potential perfect storm. We have what everybody already knows is the impact of these non-government organizations like OECD and the pressure they're putting on global regulatory changes. This was unheard of 10, 15 years ago. We didn't wrestle with these things. And the prior 1986 Act, we didn't have NGO involvement at all at that point. The second one is the statutory changes that are occurring in the U.S. and then outside the U.S. in some of our key locations like Switzerland. We think in the U.S. it looks like we have about a 30-year cycle. In 1954 we had a major recodification of the U.S. tax code statutes. We had it again in 1986, and we believe we're at that forefront now. We'll see what happens in the next 6 months. It looks like tax reform here, at least in the U.S., has been expedited. Based upon what's happening with healthcare. We shall see how that plays out. And the last major issue impacting us now is the demographic time bomb. We have a large pool of tax professionals who have stayed in the profession longer than maybe other professions for a variety of reasons, but who are now definitely looking at retiring, some earlier than what I think their employers had expected. I've gotten a lot of surprise calls this year in particular. We went through this in 1986 as well. If there is the threat of major tax reform, we clearly didn't have as big a population demographically at the retirement age, but we saw a fast exodus between 86 and 90 as we executed these of people leaving at a more rapid rate than the employers thought. We expect that to be the case again, especially with their financial accounts being so fat these days based upon the recovery we've had. So these are the three things we think that are going to impact and create a potential perfect storm that we need to be prepared for.
We expect this to be absolutely a candidate-driven market in the U.S., high demand, lower supply. In particular, we're highlighting a few key areas, the international tax planning area, transfer pricing, as well as the tax reporting area. Those are the three areas we see the biggest demand in the U.S. right now. It's pretty strong across the board. Obviously, this could turn over completely if we went to a border adjustment tax here in the U.S. and all of a sudden indirect taxes became the area. We really have a shortage of people in that area. So part of me is hoping it doesn't happen because it would be a scramble to try to fill those indirect tax roles here in the U.S. But currently, right now, those three areas are the highest demand, lowest supply areas, and they are creating what happens next, which is pressure on the compensation because of this market. So you probably will be hearing your tax function leaders, tax department heads talking about the pressure they're getting from their people with phone calls from recruiters and other companies trying to poach them, both corporate in-house and, as we'll talk about later, the big push from the public accounting firms as well to poach out of the corporate side. So the pressure on compensation is definitely there, and therefore some of this will create unexpected turnover, people you didn't think were ready to either retire early or leave the company and get opportunities that you didn't think were available in the market for your people. So you do need to be prepared for that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Okay, the other thing in the U.S., technical skills are always valued in tax. We all know that. But there is a bigger premium now being created on the softer skill sets. We have more and more non-tax leaders in the C-suite level and the cross-functional groups really looking for more well-rounded individuals on the softer skill set, the ability to communicate, yes, with the other technical people that you need to within the department or with your advisors, but the non-technical personas is the ones that we're really seeing a premium. People who can take things that are complex, that are deep, but make them simple and put them into perspective with the strategic objectives of the company, which is my second area, the strategic thinking skills, aligning with the businesses, with the operating groups, understanding what the metrics are and where the measurements are that we're shooting for, and making sure tax is part of that process, not an island out on its own. Big premium in that area. And the last one we think we're seeing more and more of a recognition is the ability for these individuals to adapt, the ability to embrace change, to know that things are going to be different here and maybe dramatically different. And tax people are not known for that. So when you have individuals who can communicate effectively, who can think strategically, think like business people first, tax people second, and they're capable of embracing change and being part of that as it occurs, those are the highest premium skill sets we're seeing, along with the foundation in tax technical skills. In the U.S., there is this starting to feel that technology might catch up and help us here. I think it's a little early for that. I don't see AI getting as fast of a traction as I think we would like. The automation and systems development in areas like tax provision has just not gotten as fast as we would have hoped it would have. So we still have shortages because we have really labor-intensive jobs still in the tax compliance and the tax reporting areas. I think that will start to change, and then someday we might get help on the planning analysis from the AI applications. We're keeping a very close eye on it. But as of right now, it's not going to be your answer in 2017, that's for sure. But we will keep a close eye on that. As a wrap-up to this from the U.S. perspective, I think it's just really important not to have anybody panic right now. We don't know. A lot of my clients are being asked to model crazy scenarios that take up a ton of their time. You know, fundamentally, you've got a house plan that you should model. Everybody knows that at either 15 or 20%, probably more likely 20%. After that, you know, you can model out something with a border adjustment tax implication to it, but I would say really relax on this and let's wait and see how the dust settles. Preparation is more along the lines of getting your team ready, your tax team, and getting them prepared for whatever changes occur. You know, mentally having them recognize that they're going to be in a little bit of a turmoil here. You could have income tax people who the next day need to be converted into indirect tax people. But most likely, there'll be more of a moderation to this. It's always seemingly a little overboard. So, we still will need people looking at what the implications for BEPS are from OECD, what undesirable tax positions issues and exposure. Fundamentally, we'll talk about this later. There's always this battle between risk mitigation and shareholder value creation. And ultimately, that's the challenge that all tax departments will have, no matter what the new climate is for tax reform, for regulatory pressures, and for the demographic changes that are going to come. We are going to lose some knowledge in tax. We just have to be prepared for it. Think two or three steps ahead. We are going to offer later on, Allie will talk about this, we'll offer up a Q&A section that you guys can ask some questions related to the U.S. and the non-U.S. markets. We're also going to offer, Will and I will both be available. If any individual companies want to have a conversation with us offline, we will set up conversations. There'll be no charges for this. Our attitude right now is the more information you have to manage your tax functions, the better. So she'll give you an opportunity to do that as well. Allie, you want to move on for Will?
Yes, thank you, Tony, for bringing up those great points. Will, what key points do you have for the global perspective?
Thank you. Thanks, Ali. Yeah, well, I think as it's highlighted by Tony, the 1986 Act and check the box 10 years later has certainly had many unintended consequences around the world. Talking to people at the moment, clients feel that US tax reform could well eclipse the OECD's BEPS project. Some even see it as the United States answer to BEPS. Now, before I run through the major European trends that we're noting, I just want to highlight what our clients are telling us about the challenges they're facing in emerging markets. There's a real increase in audit activity at the moment in Middle East Africa, Latin America, and Asia. This is a really big drain on tax department resources. Unreasonable requests, scarcely based in law, are being used as a negotiation tactic to increase tax revenues. Now, this calls for different skills, because legally based arguments alone will not win the day. Another quick thought is just that tax authorities in countries like China are now the owners of so much data that this may fundamentally change the way taxes are collected or tax audits are managed in the future. So just moving on to my first major point here is the trade-off between effective tax rate and corporate social responsibility. European companies and the subsidiaries of US multinationals are becoming more and more focused on CSR and reputation, often at the expense of ETR optimization, even actually in B2B companies where the client base are government contracts. European boards of directors are really questioning tax leaders now on certain structures, often Luxembourg structures, and there's an open divergence now between the executive and the non-executive directors on this point. Another example of this really would be in the UK after the financial crisis of 2008. The HMRC changed the rules to the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law, which is a fundamental difference. And so tax functions now need to find new innovative ways to sustain low ETRs. The aim of the game is to have a competitive and a stable ETR. For some companies, this will be low, normalized ETR, and in others, it'll be high. The challenge will be to explain this to the C-suite. The next major point I think we've heard from our clients is around BEPS implementation and the increased transparency that this has created. First of all, there's a lot of discrepancies in how BEPS is being implemented, and it's causing a lot of headaches for tax departments. Even within countries inside the EU, they're implementing the proposals in different ways and on different timescales. Nevertheless, there is a general trend here to one of increased transparency. I think if we're going to talk of Europeans, they feel that country-by-country reporting will become public information in the next 2 to 5 years. We know that in the US and in some other countries, they've not signed up to the public dissemination of this information, so we can see some friction coming here. We know 20 years ago, so much more was private, whereas nowadays it's a completely different world. Data protection is, of course, it's very important, but even with the best data security in the world, human error or clever hackers will always find a way. You know, could we end up in a situation where tax authorities are going to know more than tax teams in the future? And I think, you know, the issue here for a lot of people is that it's fine for the tax authorities to have more data, But the problem comes when, making sensitive data available for the public, for NGOs, and by extension, competitors. It really would harm innovation and competition when one business can read another's CBCR reports and work out easily where its competitor is investing. We need to allow companies to be agile and to be the first into the market. The third major point I want to take from our market assessment here is it's sort of echoing what Tony is saying around, in these volatile times, we need adaptable people. You've got US tax reform, Swiss tax reform, Japanese tax reform, EU state aid cases, BEPS, there's Brexit. There's plenty of political changes going on, and in this context, you need adaptable people. Change managers, these are the people that have dealt with business transformations in the past. Business model restructuring specialists. This is what we're hearing now are what our clients need. More people than ever are hungry. We need these people that are hungry with that right kind of go-getter attitude, with strong project management skills. And at the senior manager and director level, it's more about hiring people with proven achievement of superior results with a lack of resources. And finally, I just say, these are new rules. We haven't even heard them yet, but no one will have experience of them. Those with a reputation for finding creative solutions and the ability to implement them will be the people in demand. Those who ask, is there a better way? And as a tax professional in one of the planning advisory roles, you need to be thinking creatively about what happens next.
Now into asking, letting staff members and attendees ask any questions that they think would be important for their tax department, and letting them have the ability to really ask questions that kind of pertain to them and things that they see. So when you have a question, please hit the raise your hand button on your webinar panel, and I can make your audio live. When it comes time for your question to be addressed, you can submit any questions through the chat tool on there or by raising your hand. So I'm going to start our question and answer off by going through some questions that were submitted through our chat tool already. Here's the first question that someone has submitted. With so much uncertainty with tax reform, should we continue to hire open vacancies or wait until the dust settles?
Well, I'll start off from the U.S. perspective. It's an interesting question because we've had this hit a lot in the first quarter. Most of the U.S. clients I have are moving forward with their positions. They are not taking a wait-and-see approach. There are a few, however, have kind of dragged their heels a little bit and slowed it down. But for the most part, I would say the consensus is they're going forward with their budgeted positions and moving forward with a strategy under the guise of what we currently have in place, and not waiting to see if there's a complete turnaround in the tax reform here. Will, is it any different for you on the other side of the fence?
I think it's fairly similar. I haven't actually seen any, inertia affect our recruitment sort of, volumes. I think at the moment people are doing what they can to fill the roles that they've got while they've got sign-off. But I think, people are sort of taking a second thought of these things, and businesses that are structured in certain ways are thinking hard at the moment about where to invest and where to build in those resources. But at the moment, I think people are sort of cracking on because a lot of these tax departments are already under-resourced, and they're doing a lot more with a lot less at the moment. So when they do get a position to hire, they're going ahead and doing it.
Ali, additional questions we have?
Yep, another one just came through. What tax specialty has seen the highest growth in terms of recruitment placements in the last year?
Simple answer, transfer pricing on the U.S. side. Will, what about you?
Well, I think, there's certainly a lot of similarities here for us. I think transfer pricing, indirect tax at the higher end in Europe has been hot for some time, and I think at the director level, perhaps at the lower level it's slowing down a little at the sort of the more junior level VAT positions. But transfer pricing, business restructuring people, and indirect tax leadership, they're the key areas.
Yeah, in the U.S. is definitely transfer pricing as far as the biggest increase. We've consistently seen demand in international planning, consistently seeing demand in tax reporting. So those, as I mentioned earlier, still a foundation here in the U.S.
And the same here as well. I think, if we're talking about volume, international tax, corporate tax positions are still dominant. But in terms of new hires, so adding new people, then transfer pricing and indirect tax are the growth areas. Certainly in the last few years, yeah.
Great. Well, this might be a question more directed towards you, but what will be the effect of Brexit and the Swiss tax reform?
Well, I mean, take those two countries. One has never been part of the EU, and the other is leaving the EU after 40 years of membership. In terms of hiring, it's really strange for us here in the UK. We're not quite sure which way things are going. You hear one thing from one client, and then you see the likes of Snapchat and McDonald's setting up their European HQ in London. I think in terms of volume, we've never been more busy in London, and so it's probably too early to tell. I think it's not clear to tell for Brexit what the outcome is. I think a sensible assumption would be there's going to be a bit more on the indirect tax side. Customs, cross-border tax discussions will create more recruitment in that area. With Swiss tax reform, it's a bit more of a complicated situation. It was put to a referendum that was rejected by the Swiss people. Some cynical people I know say it's perhaps the Swiss buying a bit more time. After the UK's vote to leave the European Union, the Swiss are sensible to see what the future UK-EU relationship will be before committing to a new corporate tax regime. Of course, all this is not what people want to hear. They want to know. They want to make decisions. Companies are finding it very difficult to make these decisions. But I think for Brexit, it's still too early to tell, and Swiss tax reform now is probably going to be kicked into the long grass until sometime around 2020. Others think it'll happen sooner, but I think nothing is going to come into action now until 2020 in Switzerland.
Great, thank you, Will. What single skill set will be the most critical to improve upon now?
I think we both hit on it. It's the communication skill set for tax professionals, ability to embrace change, be project management oriented in that kind of environment. Deal with the unknown. The stereotype, which is rightfully so, is tax people tend to be pretty conservative, pretty cross the T, dot the I, but those who are capable of stepping out and thinking strategically and being a business advisory mindset are going to have be in the most demand. Eventually, there'll be some commoditization. Technology will replace some of those functionalities, but it will put more of a premium on these other skills we're talking about. So those are the ones we're trying to get our younger people to be exposed to in the profession now in our tax talent community, and trying to get them to understand that's a premium and to take some time and effort to find mentors to develop them in those areas more so than just purely focusing on the technical side. Because the technical demands will change as tax reform changes, regulatory pressures come in. So that's the biggest thing we try to do, get them to be good business advisors, think strategically, communicate effectively to non-technical folks as early as they can, and then to embrace change, not resist it. That's going to be, I think, the key skill sets from my perspective. Will, do you have any other things that you see on your side?
I think you hit the nail on the head, Tony. It's communication skills are really, if you're looking outside of the technical area, this is the area that it is still a challenge to find people with that first-class level of communication at on the leadership side, and it is improving. I think tax is attracting people with more of a natural affinity to things like that, but it is still the key thing, the thing that sets apart the good tax professionals from the great ones is that ability to talk, be comfortable in their own skin, talk confidently to people outside of the tax department, to influence those stakeholders across borders, just down the phone, and have those soft skills, that emotional intelligence, definitely.
I would like to add that on the leadership side, that's something that we are also wrestling with, the skill set of actually being world-class leaders, developing teams, developing people, working with the cross-functional groups, operating as a builder of people rather than just a hirer of people. So that's a skill set more and more of my financial leaders are valuing in their tax people. Can they build better people than themselves? Some of my clients have developed tax departments that are actually feeding grounds for other areas in finance and operations, where there's tax people that have come up the ranks and they've developed them so well from a holistic point of view that they're actually leveraging them in other areas. So I think that's a big premium for the leadership skill set as well.
Yeah, those are great points. I definitely agree with you both. Another question that came through the chat: do you foresee tax technology becoming a more important part of the tax function and the need for future tax leaders to become more technology literate?
Yes, yes, and yes. It's going to be, whether we like it or not, and leadership needs to embrace it, whether they like it or not. There is components of a tax function everybody knows can be commoditized and automated. It's just a matter of when and how it's going to happen. These other skill sets, these business advisory skill sets, that's another story. That's why it's going to put more of a premium on that side. But there will be some major changes in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years on the technology front. All of the big four have AI think tanks working on how they can bring products to the table. They'll roll them out before they're ready. They won't be as good as they promised them to be at first. It's kind of like every new technology platform, but eventually they'll probably be able to get it done right. We've moved, obviously, jobs from the U.S. to shared services groups in lower cost of locations, either in the U.S. or overseas. Finance groups have done the same thing. That's just one intermediary step before technology comes in and takes a lot of those jobs over. And the Uberization of the tax department will happen. It won't be overnight, as I said earlier, but I absolutely believe it will come in the near future. Will, different perspective, same perspective. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a bit more of the opinion that, you know, we've been saying this for quite a while, that technology is going to transform the way tax departments operate, and maybe they have incrementally, but there's been no real big bang of change. I totally agree, and I think clients would agree that this is the big change that's coming. AI, it's big data, it's crunching all these numbers and you know, creating products off the back of it. But I probably feel it's more 5+ years down the line in terms of actually being utilized by tax departments and tax authorities in any sort of a regular way. Yeah, I mean, it's a really exciting part of it. I mean, as I said earlier, I think there are parts of the tax department that will get swallowed up by that quite quickly, and perhaps you could automate VAT or sales and use compliance. You can get that automated quite quickly, and it could work. But as you say, you're not going to be able to replace people that quickly when it comes to the advisory side of the job. So yeah, I'd echo what you say there, but I would probably say it's a bit further down the track for us.
Will, are you finding, we in the U.S. are finding more of the departments hiring and creating tax technology roles embedded in the tax functions? Sometimes they come with a heavy tax background that have picked up the technology side. Sometimes they've been more of a technology person that has been supporting tax, and they basically take them over and bring them into the tax function on a full-time basis. Have you seen that over on your side of the fence?
Yeah, I mean, there are some of the much larger, you know, the blue chips have got these people in there, IT/tax people, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's a sort of a market that I've seen a huge amount of. It doesn't come up a lot in terms of new searches. So yes, they are out there. They're in this sort of funny little world of their own in some ways, but it's not as big a thing as I think it is in the US.
Interesting. Ali, any other questions?
Yeah, we actually have lots coming in, lots of great questions. One that was just asked: do you think there will be a further acceleration of baby boomer retirements if a mild form of U.S. tax reform is passed? For example, something similar to Camp 1, as opposed to a more revolutionary type of reform currently proposed by Chairman Brady and Speaker Ryan.
I think we were ready for this exodus already. I think a lot of people wanted to retire earlier when the 2008-9 recession here in the U.S. hit. It stymied them, and I'm in contact with a lot of them. I grew up with them in the profession, so some of these are people I placed when they were young in their career. We've grown up in this, so I know there's a lot of this pent up willingness to leave at the right time. Sometimes they're staying because of their loyalty to the organization, taking them through the tough times. And I do think some of them will try to weather through this tax reform period. It's an interesting time. I'm seeing some just deciding they can't do it. I just had a gentleman 2 weeks ago call me up and say, look, I apologize. I've got to retire now. I can't do it anymore. I've got my house built down in California. I want to go down and look at the ocean every day. And we had just recently brought on the number 2 person to be groomed by this person for a year and a half, and he's leaving, and we're going to have to accelerate the mentoring of that individual, which we'll do in a couple of other ways. But I do think we'll see an acceleration. If it's dramatic, that acceleration will be even quicker. They're tired. They're worn out in the U.S. They went through a lot. You check the box changes, like you said, the international changes, all these regulatory pressures. We had SOX. We have Fin 48, we have UTP, we now, turn around and now you get hit with OECD and BEPS. Now you get total potential tax reform staring them in the face. I do believe in it's not just at the leadership either. I mean, we did a stat recently and pulled the indirect tax people, just worried about what if indirect taxes was the change, and 30% of them are over 55 years and old at the senior manager and above level. We got a huge exodus of knowledge going out of that pool just in itself. But overall, I'd say 25% of the tax environment is at least in that 55 and older pool. I know the IRS stats were a little higher on their internal stats. So I think it could be a major issue. Hopefully we can keep some of them around longer. I do believe some of them will go back to work with places like our TaxBridge staffing group and do contract consulting work, bring that knowledge transfer back. We've done some of that with very senior people, ex-partners, ex-heads of planning and tax. So I think there's going to be an interesting opportunity, though, to tap into these people on a contract consulting basis going forward to help ease the pain, shall we say. Will, you have any thoughts on that?
It's difficult here. It's difficult to sort of draw the same comparisons in this area. I think, as we've worked together over the years, I mean, the US angle has always got this demographic sort of observation about these challenges, coming up ahead, and it obviously applies to the US. Does it apply as much to say the European market? I'm not sure. I mean, I think there are pockets of high activity and shortage of skills, but people tend to move across borders a lot more, I think, in Europe, and therefore it is perhaps less of a homogenous market as you have in the US. There's a finite number of tax people that you can recruit for any given role, whereas, I mean, certainly to a slight extent, there is perhaps more flexibility in the market in Europe to, if there's a lot of activity in one area, people move to the other area. So I don't quite think we have a demographic time bomb in the same way. We probably do, but to a lesser extent.
Yeah, you have the ability to level it off with your other, basically, areas that are not as homogeneous as you're saying. So while UK might have been hit, you guys came back from the war, had more babies. We had a ton of them here. So that's the baby boomer, right? After the war, bang, they come back, boom, they have all the babies. You don't have quite that historically in other parts of the world. So it's an interesting dilemma there. You're right. I think you're correct. I don't think you have the same impact. We've always said that as we go through these cycles. The only problem is we can't take the people. Our U.S. tax code is so different. It would be nice if we could steal some of your people and move them over here, but what we do is so much different than what you guys do. Now, again, if we need indirect people, that's where we're going to steal them from. You know that, right? We're going to take them from overseas and bring them to the U.S. I guarantee it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens with this this border adjustment tax and whether that will create a real increase in demand for those cross-border tax, indirect tax planning people. And there are people already transitioning to the US in certain groups. I've seen strategic hires of bringing over Brits and other nationalities to tax teams in headquarter teams in the US. So perhaps it is changing and it is opening up a bit more. Yeah, but yeah, we'll see.
Ali, what other questions do we have? I know you said a couple of those were flying in, so let's make sure we get as many in as we can.
Yeah, so one came through and asks, do you see companies continuing to follow the GE PwC model, for example, where PwC is hiring approximately half of GE's tax team? Is this solely a GE cost savings measure or a trend?
Yeah, and actually it's way more than half. So GE's keeping about 250 people at the division level, 20 at the corporate, and 400 of them are going over to PwC. That was immediately asked of me by a number of our clients. CFOs wanted to know what was going on, and chief tax officers. I think most of us that are close to it know it's an outlier situation. GE was by far the largest tax department with over 1,400 people at one time. The leadership of GE built it that way, almost like an in-house law firm and CPA firm, and they were given the budget to do that, and they produced great results. But at the end of the day, once they sold off their financial services group, they were in a real quandary there. Politically, they had taken TARP money, as we know. Politically, they had just decided they were going to move from Connecticut to Massachusetts. They were under a very lot of pressure there not to be laying off a ton of people right at that time. So I think the construction of this is politically a smart move for GE. They can move these people off to somebody else's payroll, PwC. They don't have to relocate all these people up to Boston. It's all on PwC servicing the account or where they choose to put these people. And I think it's a smart move for a 3-year window or so. Whether they continue this long term, I doubt it. I would be easily take the bet that within 3, 4, 5 years, they're going to move that back in-house and right-size the hiring with what they really need at that point. And I think there'll be natural attrition with the people that went to PwC, because if they wanted to go to public accounting, they could have all left for years. They went to corporate in-house because of what you can get in corporate in-house that you can't get in professional services. So for a while, they'll retain some of these people, but I think there'll be a natural attrition there. PwC got a nice chunk of change that they could utilize for other things they're dealing with right now. So I think it was a win-win. Don't see it as transformational. Tax departments have always been looking at how to rationalize outsourcing effectively, whether it's in indirect taxes, whether it's in compliance. Obviously reporting is a much touchier area, but they're always looking at how to optimize the budgets. And the professional service providers are going to have a very difficult time supplying the talent to do that kind of work at rates that are palatable, because they're having trouble recruiting and retaining people. The millennials are a different group. They won't put the hours in. They won't produce the profitability that the Gen Xers and the baby boomers did for these partnership structures. So I don't think it's sustainable on either side or makes sense.
It was a massive tax department, wasn't it? It had something like 1,400 people, which, I mean, after they sold off capital, I think was just not needed. So, I mean, it was a very creative move, and like you say, far better than doing layoffs. I initially thought it was something to do with US tax reform and the general kind of rumblings that are going on, but actually, I think it's probably just more of a strategic move there to avoid having to sort of lay off so many people.
Yeah, exactly.
Is this the sign of things to come? I mean, to be fair, it isn't actually the first time this has happened as well. I remember, well, I don't remember it, but I've certainly spoken to people that were part of Siemens did something similar. They sort of sold off or outsourced or spun off their tax department, their finance department, which then acted as an advisory firm. So it's happened before. I don't think it's a trend. It was just quite a canny move by both businesses.
Yeah, you're exactly correct. I'm the old guy on the block here, so I've seen this cycle. We had a big boom where the public accounting firms were pushing outsourcing aggressively, going over the heads of tax departments in the 80s and early 90s, and that was the whole concept of, outsource everything. It didn't fly. We had a bunch of big mistakes and issues. It will never fly in this age of more tightened scrutiny and compliance. It would be, I think, a catastrophe in the long run. It will be interesting to see if GE can even hold it together with PwC there and the auditors buying into it. It will be very interesting to see what the financial auditors come up with in the next couple of cycles there. Ali, what else do we have? Do we have anything else before we wrap up?
Yeah, just a few more if you guys don't mind. Aside from offering an attractive package, What changes can I make to become an employer/tax department of choice?
Development of staff.
Well, yeah.
Will, you want to cover this one? You go first. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really a case here of evaluating the three key pillars of retention. Really, I mean, you've got the professional development. That's, I think, for most people, the most important thing. So providing them with career opportunities, with taking on bigger projects, bigger regions. You've really got to figure out quickly who are your top performers and make sure that they are challenged and given every opportunity to continue their professional development. I think a close second is the compensation. I know we're looking at alternatives, but you've got to remember, when you're looking at compensation packages for your tax team, you've got to really understand the market and don't just listen to HR benchmarks, which are often way out of date. I think tax is often compared to accounting, which again is a bit of an antiquated approach. It's important for tax leaders to take the time to educate the HR and the comps and bens team appropriately. And then finally, I think, particularly talking, I consider myself a borderline millennial here. I'm not quite sure. But I'm going to speak for the millennials here. And I think, the work-life balance here is important. It is a different world. As you've said, the work-shy millennials like us, the brightest people in this generation don't necessarily want to work crazy hours. I mean, some of them do, but some of them will happily sacrifice salary in lieu of having more time with family. So, think, could you offer an 80% job to someone that's a high performer, so that they can manage their life in a different way? So there are creative ways to retain the best people and also to attract the best people, and it doesn't always involve offering the highest salaries.
Yeah, from our perspective, we've been heavily involved in these discussions for years with our clients, where we take take a very deep approach on long-term strategies. And the first thing I try to teach every chief tax officer that goes into these roles for the first time is, don't get wrapped up in all retention is good retention. Turnover is not a bad thing in certain situations. Sometimes people outgrow departments. Sometimes departments outgrow people. So first off, don't get wrapped up in this, that 100% retention is a great thing. It's not. New blood coming in is important. Now, what Will said is equally important, though. Think about the people you need to retain in your tax departments, and think about what we've said about the skill sets that are going to be most valuable. Who are your top 20% performers? Use Pareto's law, look at the 80-20 rule. Make sure those people are anchored down and make sure you're developing them. What I will tell you in 30 years of recruiting is, I cannot recruit a person just for money. I cannot recruit a person just for work-life balance. But development, if they feel they have a mentor, if they have a company that's working with them on the development of their growth towards their goals, while they are moving towards their goals, they will stay there no matter what. Even if you're not in the top 25 percentile of comp, you're in the mid-range. Now, you don't want to be in the bottom 25 percentile, so that's important that Will's pointing out. You don't want to be working them 80 hours a week, so you have some reasonable balance there. But if they're developing their skill sets towards their goal, so if you have a number two or number three person who someday wants to be the chief tax officer of the department there or somewhere else, and you know that you might not be able to get that person there in your group, start positioning them so that they actually are in position to be a head of tax somewhere else potentially. Don't be afraid of that. If they leave and they get a job somewhere else, it brands your department and your company as a great place to work, easy to recruit. It's a vicious positive cycle that you create. It feeds itself. So I really stress a lot of emphasis on career development, understanding where these people want to go. Don't assume it. Don't project your views or your leadership's views into this person. Somebody might be happy just running the tax operations group and you want them to be more than that. Don't push them out the door by asking them to do more than they want to do. Understand your people, understand their goals, and then help them get there. And you might lose them for one reason or the other, but there will be a positive influence externally in the market. Also, if you can, start to create a channel like I spoke about earlier where your tax people are being utilized in other areas in the company, especially if they got these other skills we've talked about. If they're business advisors, if they've got the change adaptability mindset, if they're great communicators, there's no reason a tax person can't move into other areas of the company. If you can show that traction, it's easier to attract people in, retain them as well. And a few of my clients do a phenomenal job in that area. I have ex-tax people who are CFOs of Fortune 500 companies, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, believe it or not, that started in tax. So it's a great question. It has a lot, but for me, it's just focus on development. Number one, neutralize comp so it's not a big issue. Neutralize work-life balance so you're not killing them. But the real thing is develop them, and they will stay with you.
Great points there mentioned, Tony. We will do one last final question, and then we can start wrapping up this webinar. This last question asks, you mentioned a shared service environment is a path that certain companies are taking that may also include tax responsibilities. Can you talk a little more about what you see that works and what does not work?
Will, you want to speak on that one first?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a topic that's coming up a lot at the moment. We've had one client in particular where there were a lot of heavy discussions about whether to go for a hub model, whether to have it, with a shared service center in Europe and one in Central America, or centers of excellence. I think one of the observations I've got from all this is that some businesses get into an area first. They benefit from being the first major employer in a say a low-cost location, and they train these people up, and then often they get picked off by the newcomers who get there, and they see look, here's an indirect tax analyst, great, with an accounting background, fantastic, we'll take them, we'll offer them a little bit more money, and so you can get into these kind of quite heated. It doesn't take long for the market to heat up in some of these locations, but generally speaking, yes, I mean, this is the way forward for a lot of businesses. It's a way to control costs, keep the value-added people in the higher cost locations if they have to be, and try to a certain extent have as much as possible running through the lower cost locations. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't work for everybody, but it's certainly a trend that's continuing. I think within regions rather than cross continents, the days of perhaps of having a giant shared service center, perhaps in 9 hours away time zones, it's less common. But certainly within Europe, you see a lot of successful shared service centers operating out of northern Spain or Eastern Europe. So and they've worked for many years for these companies. So it definitely works. I think one of the ways to make it work really well, though, and this ties into Tony's previous point about how you retain good people and motivate people, is having an element of, I mean, this works for the bigger companies, to be able to offer international secondments. You will keep great people, and if you can show, and there are some great examples of this, I mean, there's a few particular companies that are very good at it, in developing people from inventory cost accounting all the way into tax and all the way beyond that to become an FD or a CFO. And they may have started in a shared service center in a faraway place, but they can make it to the top. And that's inspiring for the rest of the company, for the rest of the tax department. It's something I love to point to. On LinkedIn, you can say, well, check out this person. They're in this company, and they've been there for 30 years and they've developed themselves. I think there's certainly a real benefit of, and it's a great feeder for the other teams to have these shared service centers.
So, I mean, my perspective has been, and I've advised my clients that I've divided it into two pools. There's the shared services for the very commodity side of the fence, compliance, number crunching, lower skill set level. You can get a lower skill set at a much cheaper cost in these off-site locations, and a lot of them put one in Asia, one in Europe. That tends to be the game plan that I see a lot of them doing. And then there's these higher level skill sets that you're rotating people over to do more advisory work. And I'm 100% in agreement with Will. Those jobs and developing those people where they can get a cross-cultural perspective is a phenomenal training mode. But if I go back to shared services specifically and the commoditization, I think these are simply interim steps where eventually these will be gone and they will be automated, that these will be scaled down. Again, it's kind of like a driver of a car. It's a skill, but it's not a high-level skill. Eventually, we won't need the driver driving the car. Uberization will happen across the board, whether we like it or not. So I think I would caution my clients to put too much money and investment in this. I think with Will, maybe he's right. It might be 5 years. It might be 3, 4. It might be 6 or 7 years, but it's not going to be much longer than that, to where a lot of those roles will be clearly automated, and we'll have streamlined ERP systems finally. SAP won't keep making a fortune over everybody time and time again. So we will see this evolve, and I think it will be, again, sooner than we think, but you know, we're prepared that it might be 10 years, but I really don't think so. I think it's going to be quicker. So I think shared service concepts are fine. I think they're a short-term solution. So I question how much money companies should put into it. I've challenged a number of my clients on this time and time again. But, you know, sometimes you need to do these things on an interim basis because of the costs that are here. The other solution to that, I've talked to a number of my clients, is to move tax functions within the U.S. So we have one big company. We helped Disney move their compliance function from California down to Orlando. They had facilities there. Well, we ended up moving reporting. We ended up moving basic audit down there, saving them a ton of money, attracting people to Florida, no state income tax, salaries lower, stability much higher than it would have been in L.A. So, and years ago, I advised PwC of doing the same thing, and they set up some of their compliance centers, which were in India, and they moved them here in the U.S., and they've got one in North Carolina, one in, I think, Jacksonville area. Again, lower cost centers within the U.S. At least you're grooming some talent here in the U.S. You might be able to bring some of those people back up into the systems there, and it's more secure. You have better control. So those are other options to be thinking about before you go to shared services. Ali, anything else that we need to cover on the question side?
I think we're good today. We can cover a lot of those questions in our exclusive online forum after this as well, so we can really keep the conversation going with all of the great questions everyone's asked. So thank you again, everyone, for your participation in asking those questions. I really appreciate that. Will and Tony, do you have anything else you'd like to add while we wrap up this webinar?
I've got a couple of questions for you. How long will this forum stay open? Ali, is this going to be an ongoing thing where people can, as tax reform comes up and other initiatives, if they have Q&As, that we'll be monitoring that to make sure they get their answers?
Yes, this will be going on throughout the year, so there's no really end date for this, as a lot of things will kind of progress throughout the year and things will come up. So we really wanted to keep it open. That way this can kind of be a place to go when you have questions and want to discuss this with other people and kind of get their opinions and insights. So this will be open for you guys. There's no end date, so it'll be open for good.
And then how will they line up appointments if they want to have conversations with Will and I? Will that be through you? What's the instructions there?
Yep. So I provide my phone number on the next slide, and then I will also be sending a follow-up email that will have my information as well as a link to your Calendly, Tony, where they can set up through there. But ideally, scheduling through me, I'll have all of my contact information available in the email we will send out following this webinar.
Will, anything else you want to add at the end of this?
Nothing more than just to say it's been a pleasure, doing this webinar with you, and yeah, I look forward to continuing this conversation with with our clients, and as you say, I think this topic's going to roll and roll. I think we're really at the start of a big era of change. So it's an exciting time for all of us, connected to the tax industry. The old world, the old global tax systems are antiquated, and I think with all this that's going on, we're entering into something that should hopefully be fit for purpose in the 21st century. So yeah, I think these forums should be quite an interesting place for us to bounce ideas off each other.
Wanted to thank everybody who attended. Again, feel free to reach out directly to Ali. She'll set up calls with both Will and I at times that's convenient for you if you have any other questions that are specific to your situation. And keep an eye on the forum for any new announcements and posts. And we will post some things in there over time as tax reform starts to come up and some of the implications. If Will sees things, he'll start to do that as well. So it will be fresh for you guys when you need it. Thank you, Ali. You can wrap up. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. So to give you a little bit more information on this exclusive online forum we're creating for you, this forum will give you the opportunity to submit any questions you have anonymously and stay up to date with any of the upcoming changes as the year progresses. The forum is 100% confidential, and participants' information will not be accessed by anyone else. As Tony mentioned, we are also offering a free 15-minute phone call that provides a personalized and customized chance to get an objective view on your tax department and solutions that may be helpful. So keep an eye out for an email that will be sent with all this information, as well as a recording of today's webinar. Thank you so much for attending today. We are very grateful for your attendance and participation, and applaud you for taking the next steps, preparing you and your tax department for the potential perfect storm. Have a great day.